Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are welcoming once again to our conversation Chaim Noll, a writer, scholar, author, teacher, currently living in the Negev desert. And the topic of our conversation today is going to be Israel and the concept of democracy and diversity. Quite a big topic. So, Chaim, welcome and tell us more about Israel, the concept of democracy and diversity.
Yeah, I came to this point when I read in synagogue the article of a younger rabbi who wrote about the concept of religious Judaism of King Messias, who is expected to come. And he asked, how is it with democracy, so that when the realm that is the goal of all our efforts is a kingdom. So he wrote very interesting about the role of democracy for the new state of Israel, that the foundation of Israel in his eyes was only possible because the countries that had to decide about this were democracies, so that the tolerance towards Jews is greater, of course, in a democracy than in former kinds of societies. And from this beginning, he came to the question: how do we live here in Israel? How democratic is Israel? And what does democracy mean to us? And I see, when I think about it, just in these days during the war, that democracy is one of the cornerstones of our self-understanding, of our self-esteem. Not only the formula that we have often heard, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and as such needs the protection of the West. This is only one aspect. But I see that for me and my friends and my fellow citizens, the fact that our country is democratic and we keep up the values of democracy under pressure in a time of pressures, and other concepts, other religious concepts that are not compatible with democracy. I must say that religious Islam is completely undemocratic, and people live like that, and that we feel the more the necessity to keep democracy here in Israel is a value, and something that people in the West have difficulties to understand, that there are demonstrations against the government now at the moment. It is interesting that young people go to such a demonstration, but maybe next week they get a call from the army to return as a reservist to their unit, and they do this. And I came to the point that thinking about the self-understanding that just the possibility to go to such a demonstration and to oppose the government and to use the possibilities of democracy, that is a part of the motivation of these young people after they went to the demonstration against the government to go to the army and do their duty there and risk their lives for this country. So that I think that the freedom we have here is a essential part of our motivation to withstand the pressure and the dangers we have to face.
Yeah, you're actually raising a great point here, especially for a Western audience, because most people don't understand, in many cases, don't even know about this internal dialectic that happens all the time in Israel, which is a democratic state. You know that in the West, the words that media are spreading are Israel apartheid state and all that nonsense that comes, I don't know from where, because in most cases this is a nonsense coming from major TV stations like the BBC, or in the United States CNN, which you expect they have some correspondent there. They have some people living in that society. So how can you report facts about this society in a complete different way? And there is another point that I believe is also interesting for a Western audience, is sometimes, it is used against Israel, the fact that there are some Orthodox Jews that you remember when there was this conference in Iran, and they participated together with Ahmadinejad. And that's used against the state of Israel without understanding that that's exactly what a democracy look like, where you can dissent radically and still not face penalties.
Yeah.
But it's not thematized. It's just thematized. Oh, look, the Jews hate the state of Israel. Again, always reading things in ways that are completely crazy. People don't understand the secularism of the state of Israel, actually.
Yeah, it is, let's say, the pride of most Israeli people to have a very special, accentuated opinion that is out of the way somehow. So when you start a discussion here, you come very quickly to a point that someone opposes you. So, and what about ever you talk to them? So the tradition of religious Judaism has never been dogmatic. So it has to do with the character of the Bible, that is a book of very different voices and a lot of dialogues and a lot of contradictions. And the Talmud developed that system, so that the Talmud is a book full of opinions that contradict each other. And you have to find your way, and you have to find the opinion that is the right one for yourself. So every individual person has to find out, in the big offer we have here of very different and diverse opinions and standpoints, where he or she wants to stand. And this gives you a feeling of freedom that is, I must say, really also in the Western society seldom. Conformism is no value here in Israel. I know that, for instance, in Germany, where is a kind of society behavior trying to be in conformism with a leading group. Here in Israel, it is very different. People like to be in dissent, and they like to be in discord with other groups, with other people. That belongs to our feeling of ourselves, that we have our own opinion and that we are individuals. And in times of war, it may be puzzling for people abroad to see how different the opinions here are in the country. I mean, in the end, the army leadership is now the most important power, and they do what they know is right for the defense of the country. But nevertheless, everybody has its own opinion about it, how the war has to be done, and how the army had to operate. And I think this belongs to our feeling of ourselves. And we need this just in these difficult times to know who we are and what we defend.
Yeah, Italians are all Jews when it's about soccer. Every
Yeah.
single Italian knows better than the trainer how to make the team for the game.
Mm,
Every single one
mm,
of them. You won't find two in
mm,
agreement about the
mm,
team. And that's
mm,
also another, I'm sure you know, the old joke, where there are two Jews, there are three parties.
mm.
But it's
Yeah,
funny.
we try to fulfill that old promise to have as many opinions as possible, and to find all the time new opinions that no one before had and has expressed. So that you're very happy here in Israel when you can contribute to a discussion, something no one in the room has ever heard before. It may be extreme, it may be crazy, but it's interesting. So, and this, I mean, in the moment of war, it's a kind, maybe it sounds a little cynical now, it's a kind of self-entertainment. So we need that. We need that feeling. My grandsons told me that they had political discussions even in the army, in the moments when they had to fight and could relax, but it was always humoristic. So they made jokes about it. They made jokes about their political opinions. Everyone had a different from his neighbor, but after the break was over, they went together and fought. And in this army, from the beginning on, they are they are trained to stand in for each other. That's so important. I see that how young people operate here. The feeling of solidarity is really in flesh and bone. So they help each other, and when they go into these houses in Gaza, you see how they protect each other. The entire pattern is of protection, of solidarity. And then it's kind of fun in the break to talk about the differences, and that we are all of different political opinions. And this is something that people abroad don't really understand. They think, how can a country so divided, so always in inner problems and turmoils and political dissent, how can this country be so united in the moment of danger and when we have to fight? This was also for me very interesting to observe. I must tell you that I'm still thinking about it. On October 8th, the day after this terrible attack happened, people from all over the world, many Israelis are abroad, traveling or living abroad. They all wanted to return in that moment, of all different opinions. There are people leaving the country because they don't like to live here. And they say that openly, that they don't like the government, or they don't like the style of life, and they like it more in Thailand at the moment or in Portugal, and so they go abroad. But in the moment this happened, they all come back. So the El Al, the airlines had problems to bring them all home. When I was stranded on October 8 in Berlin, so I had to. My flight was planned scheduled for early morning of October 8, but it was cancelled. It was not an Israeli airline, and I couldn't go back. And I called the Israeli airline El Al in Frankfurt and asked whether they had a seat in one of the next planes for me. And the employee asked me on the telephone, "How old are you?" And I said, I will be 70 this year. And she said, then I don't believe that you will be tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. You have to wait some days. The planes are full of young people who want to return. And this was for me very interesting because I had seen before how different they are and how different kinds of lifestyle are usual here in the country, from ultra-Orthodox to the leftist left positions you can ever imagine, and all and everything with a lot of empathy. So people really live the way they think. And in the moment of danger, all this didn't count anymore. And they all came back to fight. And this has worked.
Well, basically, I mean, it is a sense of being a nation. It is, you see, it sounds now, it is also, per se, it's weird that it sounds strange that a nation is a nation. It is weird. We just have been thrown in this limbo of history that is the 21st century, where we do not understand anymore. I mean, for us, all concepts are upside down, because this would have been considered normal by every European citizen, no matter what nation he belonged, until the Second World War, most likely, most probably, you know, and even in the United States, because I mean, you protect what's your own, you protect your community, because you don't. A defensive war is very different from an offensive war, and that's probably also some. But you see, also, it is interesting to point out. I was actually recently mentioning this to someone during a discussion. I don't know if there was a story during the Second World War in England regarding Lord Haw Haw. That's how it was called. His name was William Joyce. It was a Irish trader that from Berlin. He was working on the Nazi propaganda machine and managing radio shows toward England, spreading basically Nazi propaganda. And there was a discussion in the British cabinet during the war, during the Second World War, if they had to stop this transmission, you know, with interferences, as they did in many other cases. The Nazi tried to do that as well. And the British cabinet decided no, because this is the freedom of speech, so that the English have to be able to hear this nonsense and make a judgment by themselves. And I mean, you're talking, this is an historical fact. Everybody can check this. Lord Haw Haw, it's called, you know? And that was during the Second World War. Today, we have the European community talking about censor Twitter. They already censored RTL. So it's a different scenario. It's a different world, where in Israel, it seems that you have maintained the sense of nation, of community, and of course, on democratic basis that we just have lost.
Yeah, it's interesting because many people would not even accept to say that Israel is a nation. There are many people in the world who say that Jews are a religious group, a religious belief. The fact that Israel is really a nation, yes, that was proved in many situations, but also this war. There is a deep connection of the young people to the country, and a kind of solidarity among them. For me, it's very interesting to study, because I come from a completely different situation. I come from a country where freedom of opinion was oppressed, where we're imprisoned for expressing your opinion. So I was born in the East after the war, after the division of Berlin in two parts. I was born in East Berlin. Later we went to the West, but I grew up in an atmosphere of where freedom of opinion was oppressed, and of course people who have been in that situation are especially sensitive in this point, and thus I'm I was very concerned about developments in Western countries, especially Germany, I must say. I think Germany is the most problematic country in this regard. There's the tendency to have conform opinions with the majority. So that's something that breaks up a little now also in Germany in the last years. I mean, the left in Germany has very much exaggerated. They have widely exaggerated their oppression of other people's opinions. The so-called cancel culture in Germany was widespread, and I also had to suffer from it. So there are people in Germany who call me right, extreme right, because I say that patriotism is a positive value, or because I say that also people of the right have the right to express their opinion. So in Germany, it was during the last decade, it came down more and more. And what is interesting for me is the question: why are people in Israel so motivated? Why are young people motivated to defend the country? And why are people in Germany not? You don't find in Germany so many young people who were ready to defend the country. They say that quite open, that they are not, that they don't feel connected so much with their country that they would be ready to defend it with the risk of their lives or something. So why is it here and why not there? And I think it has to do just with that phenomenon that the more freedom you have, the more you love. That I mean, freedom is a very rare but very natural phenomenon. So many human beings want to be free and want to and love their freedom of decision. And the more you make it possible for them, the more they will identify with the place where it happens. So I think that the unwillingness of many young Germans to stand in for their country has to do with the fact that there is no real freedom of opinion at the moment. That's my feeling. Whereas here, on the contrary, the more freedom of opinion they have, the more they love their country and defend it.
Yeah, but let's not forget also the cultural climate that has been completely destroyed in Germany after the war. You know, during the Nazi time, the entire German culture has been eradicated, and what was left after the war is not even appreciated, is not even remembered. Because I mean, you know, I understand you focus on Germany, but the crisis is a crisis of the West, and look at what kind of political class and everywhere. You know, in America, the debate is between what is this? You know, every person with a few neurons in his brain should say, "Are you really discussing, I don't know, dogs and no absolute nonsense?" No, but you see that these people do not have a grasp of the situation, while other people do have a grasp of the situation. You know, it's a tragedy that Western culture, it's even an offense today. That's the big problem. I mean, where do these people have to get their inspiration? Where do they have to get a sense of what a community is, a nation is? People feel defenseless against their own political leaders. That's why, you know, they don't even go to vote. They've been disillusioned. They've been separated from everything that, you know. There was a you mentioned the German parliament. There was a vice president, I think she's of the German parliament, that in 2017, I believe, she came out with an expression saying that the German culture is the German language. How can you? This is a person who is the second person in the German parliament, the most important role in the German parliament, and she says stuff like, the German culture is the German language. This is a sign of a cultural desert. That's why the young generations are so easy to be tricked, are so easy to be caught into any kind of nonsense, because they don't have any way to compare. They don't have any comparison. I don't know what happened to their grandfathers, I don't know what happened in their family. Probably that's also one consequence of the nuclear family, or the nuclear individuum that raided the Frankfurt School was warning against. The atomized individual. And these are all problems that have a huge impact on society, or probably, let me say this, Chaim, we are dying civilization. That's probably what it is. And Israel is not a dying civilization, but the West is a dying civilization. We are at the point in history that is so similar to the end of the Roman Empire. And I don't mean the 476, again, the school narrative. No, I mean those centuries from the 5th centuries to the 7th, 8th centuries. And that's not studied. It's not discussed. People don't have a frame of reference. So what do they have to defend?
It has to do with awareness of history. Of course, you mentioned that they don't know what they can identify with. It has to do with history, of course. So Israeli school children learn about the history of our people, our nation, from very early times. This is deep-rooted in the general tradition. That's not only a question of schooling and teaching the children. It is, for instance, in the religious festivals there are festivals of memory of remembering what has happened to our fathers and before, the Avot in Hebrew. So that is something that is deep-rooted in the general conscious here. So there is no problem with that. So people know what a Jew is, what Jews have gone through, what Jews had to suffer. And when this threatened to become a little bit theoretic in these very peaceful years we had before, the October 7 has made clear that history continues. So there is no end of history, not for the Jewish people. So that what they had learned at school could happen to Jews, that really happened. And this gave a new feeling of identification with the country. In general, I must say that the relation to values like tradition, family, history are completely different in Israel than in most European countries. Although people like their own opinion and are different and are free, but they altogether share a feeling of historical background. I don't know how they do that here in the schools, how they teach the children. We all do, also the parents and grandparents. We have, for instance, the Seder night at Pesach. The Seder night at Pesach reflects 3,000 or 4,000 years of history. And this is read in texts. There is a book, the Haggadah Shel Pesach, that will be read in, I think, 90% of Israeli families at this night. Mostly the children do, because they read better, because they read all the time than the adult people. So they read about things that have happened 4, 3, 2,000 years ago, and in a way as if it could happen today, and it has happened. It has happened today, recently. So this is one of the reasons why we are so connected, because of the feeling of history we have. I know that it is a problem in Europe that they have obviously not anymore, or that some generations in the recent past have tried to eradicate those feelings, the connection to values like history, tradition, also religion. I mean, you happen to be a very religious person, but you must know the essential values of your religion, and you must know the Bible so far that you know on what European civilization is based. But young people in Europe don't know the Bible anymore. So they can't understand how the values, for instance, of the French Revolution, how all this came out of the biblical thought. On the contrary, they think that the modern times are against the Bible and that there is a opposition. No, they don't know about it. There is, for instance, some very interesting French writer, a member of the Revolutionary Congress in France, Comte de Volney. Comte de Volney, he was an earl, you would say in English, an aristocrat, and he went as a young man. That's why I know about him so much. He went to the desert here in the Mideast. He had a lot of money and could travel also already in the 18th century. And when you read what he saw here, you see that he was completely at home in the biblical metaphors and the biblical history. And this man became a revolutionary then. So it was, for him, it was no problem, because in his eyes, the revolution stood in for the values of freedom of the individual, all that is freedom of decision, for instance, is one of the oldest biblical values already in the Mosaic books. People don't know about this. They don't know anything about the Bible, for instance. That's a real loss. I mean, except of that, this is one of the most interesting books to read ever written. So there is an anecdote of German Marxist, communist writer Bertolt Brecht. I don't know whether you know him, and he is not that much in fashion anymore as he was in the 50s, when everybody knew him and every theater in the world played his theater plays. He was asked which book he would take with him when he was condemned to live on an isolated island, and he said the Bible, without doubt, because they are the most interesting stories and the most entertaining stories the literature knows, and that's true. So except of that, it's not even a question of religion so much. You haven't to be a devout Jew or Christ to love the Bible as a book of literature that tells the most interesting stories man has ever experienced. And it's a real loss that because of ideological atheism and other very short-sighted ideas, such a source as the Bible came in disregard as a book of intolerance and what people say. Nothing of that is true. It's the most tolerant book in the world because the most extreme and interesting stories about men are told there. And that's a real loss for young people in Europe when they lose the connection to the sources of their culture and their continent.
You know, there is a book that I think I already mentioned during one of our conversations, and it's one of the most brilliant American thinkers that unfortunately is completely underestimated and forgotten. Richard Weer was his name. And you have to think that this book, Ideas Have Consequences, was reviewed by people like Reinhold Niebuhr or Paul Tillich, with enthusiastic. Niebuhr said, a profound diagnosis of the sickness of our culture. Perfect to the point. And I want to read just a passage regarding to what we are trying to discuss. I quote, "The man of culture finds the whole past relevant. The bourgeois and the barbarian find relevant only what has some pressing connection with their appetites." And you see, and that's where we are. Of course, you cannot compare in any time of history the Jewish culture to other cultures, because in the Jewish tradition, the concept of zachor, the remembrance, the memory, is a central concept, which makes sense for a people that's been scattered for 1,000 years everywhere. Memory was the only palace where you can keep your unity. But even for Westerns, really, I always advise for the reading of Richard Weer, because it explains so well this turning where we are now in a complete subversion of all concepts, of all values. What you say, for example, the kids go in school, they learn the history. Yes, kids go in school in America too, but what do they learn? This is the main question. Because schools, unfortunately, it would be a big discussion, but partially is fault of the Prussians. The Prussians invented or the modern school system that has been adopted by everyone, and the Prussians had the intention was not to educate children; it was to make soldiers, it was to make professionals, and that's exactly what our training systems are doing. Just that now these training systems are in the hands of ideologues, and they are spreading ideology, just like in Soviet Russia, where they were teaching the various ideology. And that's always that to me, I'm fixated to this, but I believe that all our problems are cultural problems, because when we talk and we have read some books, we do not need to, it's like when you talk to physicists, or to someone who is a very specialized person, you don't need to explain what is convection, because he already knows. It's already there. Now it's not here anymore. It's not here.
No.
You see,
it was still in the 20s, so it's not so long ago that the line was broken. So when I, for instance, read an author of the modern times, also very connected to the desert, Saint-Exupéry. Saint-Exupéry was educated at a religious school in France, run by Jesuits. So this Cietas Jesu, and his books are full of implications to biblical, and he doesn't explain. It's what you say. So he uses the metaphors still in the feeling that everyone understands. Yes. But today, young people don't understand anymore. They read this and don't understand the metaphor he uses and the real meaning of the story. And that's a problem that the loss is really great. And the loss of culture is, of course, a loss of motivation. And the more culture crumbles and loses its impact, the less young people are willing and capable to defend their country. So that is what I learned here in Israel, and I think about it every day. I didn't know what they learned here at school. I've never been in an Israeli school. I came here as a man in my early 40s. My grandchildren have been at school here, and the Israeli schools are not authoritarian. They are very liberal in the style, so they can talk and use their telephones, and I don't know whatever. So it's very free. But in the end, the young people who came out of this school, my grandchildren, were deeply connected to this country and to its culture and to its history. And they, of course, know what is written in the Bible. That's, by the way, history of the country. So they learn it at school. That's a matter of course that people here know the biblical sources and that they know the essential parts of old history, the ancient history. That's no question here. So thus the capability to understand books, for instance, is much bigger. People read a lot. I was astonished to see what my grandsons read. So they read in different languages, by the way, because they also learned different languages and they read books. I have never heard that young Europeans and so many young 18-year-old read books of that kind, of that cultural background. But they obviously this has worked here and has been well, has functioned, that young people learned about history, about their tradition in a way that didn't trigger their opposition or something. That's also a problem when you are too authoritarian, stressing on biblical values or something. That triggers opposition. That's the problem the ultra-Orthodox here in Israel have. The ultra-Orthodox lose about half of their young people who leave the ultra-Orthodox environment because it is them in a very authoritarian and a boring style. They are confronted with the religious things. So just the secular schools, that was a great surprise for me. Convey these values in a way that young people identify with them. So this has worked. I mean, from this point of view, the terrible time we go through now, we have war, the longest war Israel ever had for 1 year, and there is no end in sight so far. We have to continue with now in the north to disarm the Hezbollah because we can't allow them to send rockets every day and make a part of the country unhospitable so that people have to lose their homes, to leave their homes and so on. So we all know that the war will be continued. Now in Gaza, the worst is done. Obviously, they say that Hamas as a military corporation is widely destroyed. So I learned also from my grandson who just returned from Gaza last week what they do now. So they destroy the booby-trapped houses and things like that. So it's already preparation for times of peace without Hamas, but they have to do the same in the north with the Hezbollah. So we all know that we are in a time of war with no end tomorrow. We cannot realistically expect that the war is over tomorrow. This is naive. Maybe some people here hope for that, but it's a majority. Most people know that it is inevitable to continue until we can live here in peace again without being threatened by rockets every day. So just in such a time that is really difficult, and we feel the war gradually influencing our everyday life. So there are first, I wouldn't say we lack something really, but for instance, the internet is insecure. Yeah, we have problems with the internet at the moment. We all know that, and it can be worse when hackers from all over the world, Russian, Chinese, Iranian hackers try to disrupt the Israeli internet communications. So we And that's not all. So, for instance, my place here is a very cultivated suburb of villas where educated people live, and army officers and some professors of the university. And it was always very clean. But the men who cleaned the place were Palestinian workers. So they're not allowed to come in anymore, and the place is not clean anymore. So we see how we gradually lose things here in the war we didn't even think about. That the streets were clean was a matter of course, but it's not anymore. So these details I only mentioned to show you that we really all are confronted with the impact of the war every day. But the great optimistic feeling that this war gave us is how the Israeli youth dealt with it, and that young people really, that we can entrust them the future of the country. So they have shown that obviously Israeli school education was successful. Israeli family life is intact. In times of war, this is really crucial, whether you can rely on a family behind. That is a matter of course here, that every family supports its soldiers with the utmost force possible. Mothers go to the army bases with 10 cakes they have prepared at home and bring them to the soldiers. That's everyday situation here. The big fast food chains offer their food for the soldiers for free since months. There was a problem with McDonald's because the McDonald's managers had obviously exaggerated, so they made losses here in Israel because they invited all the soldiers to eat for free in their, and it was in the times when there were 500,000 people in uniform. You can imagine what that means. So it's not meant. It's not that dramatic anymore. So there are not so many young people in the army anymore. It's a much smaller contingent, but we feel it. There is a lot of things are not really working as we had it in the past. And just in this time, the general mood is unbroken. And the young people, I must say, I'm really impressed. They are positive, they're optimistic, although they have seen terrible things. Many of them are in psychiatric treatment after what they have seen. There is a lot of, how is it called, post-traumatic stress disorder syndromes and things like that, thousands. And thousands have been terribly injured, crippled, lost leg and arm and so on. Young people, 20, 18-year-olds. It's a terrible feeling to imagine to start your life without your right arm, for instance. But they do. And in these moments, the family is important. And the general atmosphere in the country, and this is unbroken. So I can tell you that we have a lot of losses and we feel the war, but I'm every day impressed about the positive atmosphere here in the country, nevertheless. And of course, you start to ask yourself, how is that possible? How does it happen? And I think that that was our starting point, the possibility to identify with the democracy in a not theoretic way, not that we talk about it much about this, but that we all know what freedom of opinion is, and we know what we stand for, and that's a matter of course here in the country. And this has worked, and it has to do, I think, with the deep connection to the old sources of our culture, that the Bible is a kind of, it's the most popular book here in the country. Everybody knows what is written in the Bible. also children from secular background. That's a matter of course to know about this. So, and then you are connected with the sources, then you fight for it, and that's what got lost in Europe, and that's why I can only hope that there will be another generation coming in Europe who fight back to the traditions and sources of their culture. You don't believe that?
No.
I believe in change. In human beings are unforeseeable creatures, and I'm quite sure there will be changes we will be surprised about.
Unfortunately, I see the power of ideologies and the lack of knowledge,
Hmm.
and that's grasping the minds of the Western people almost everywhere. I mean, what we are just discussing here, that it's absolutely normal, natural. If you would have here any, I don't know, well-educated American teaching anywhere, he would tell you that Israel is a colonizer state. So basically, the complete reversal of every reality. How can you cure a society where people tell? I mean, already, I find already humiliating that we have to discuss such things. That's my first point. It's humiliating that you have to discuss an absurd claim like Israel is a colonizer when you just need to dig in the ground everywhere in Israel to find 3,000 years old coins with Hebrew Hebrew letters. It's such a nonsense, but it's a nonsense that has taken place in the people's mind. Because if you do, you see, for many years ago, I studied quite intensively some ideological movements, extreme religious movements, and I noticed that the common element in all these movements, I mean, the reason why they could have, and they have millions of followers, is because they entered in a empty room where people had no knowledge of the
Yeah.
Bible, of history, so they could tell them every kind of absurdity. But that was just related to small sects in America or in Europe. Now it's the entire society that it's susceptible to every kind of absurdity. Every kind. It doesn't matter what kind of absurdity you want to mention. I mean, now people are discussing, and I believe those are manipulation techniques. I'm completely convinced. They're discussing about the gender of a male boxer, and if you say a man is not a man, you're a bad person. So this is ridiculous. It's humiliating that we are here. But of course, if you want to participate in the big feast, the big feast of the culture industry, of the all this apparatuses from whatever, all this dark apparatuses, you have to say what I see is not what I see, which is basically Orwell. So where you want to start when you have such a situation, and you have enemies, powerful enemies that hate you, that are working for your demise? Where do you want to start? You cannot convince millions of peoples that have been brainwashed. You cannot convince from today to tomorrow, because they don't have the basis. You were saying just that about the Bible. In English, there is an expression, the writing on the wall. If you
Yeah.
talk to any American over 50, he understands what that means. Try to say that to a 20 years old. He would ask you, okay, where's the writing? He doesn't know the book of Daniel. He doesn't know anything.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah.
Of
The
course.
losses are great, but nevertheless, I believe in the sudden changes of general opinion. We have seen that very often, and of fashion. We see it, for instance, in Germany now. In Germany, young people vote for the right-wing parties, most of them. That was a big surprise with the elections now in several Länders, in several parts of Germany, in Saxonia and Thuringia. There were held elections 2 weeks ago, and the Christian Democrats got a lot of young voters, and the extreme right, I call them like that. I'm not really convinced they are so extreme right, but they are the right-wing party, the AfD. They got most of the votes. So the young people didn't vote anymore for the left-wing parties, for the Greens and all those, because they have so much exaggerated what we are talking about that it is not interesting for young people anymore. So it happens. I have seen how general opinion changed about communism, for instance, or the situation in the East has changed, that we believe that most of the people were backing the system and were supporters of the system, but overnight it turned out that the majority was against it. So after you have seen things like that, I don't believe in the unchangeability of mindsets. So mindsets can collapse overnight, and completely different ideas take hold of people. So this may happen. I think that those ideologists you talk about have overstressed so much, and have let's say they have overstressed their welcome. So they have caused aversion in the meantime in many young people. I think so. I think we will experience that during the coming years and decades. I can't believe that it goes that way undisturbed as it is now. So that's not the kind of how humans are. They suddenly change when they see it doesn't work. And they see, for instance, in Europe, it doesn't work what the left did with the uncontrolled immigration of Muslim people into their countries, that it ruined their civil society, that they are not secure anymore, that they have to fear for their children. I could tell you, people, I met a young editor or a publisher who owns a small publishing house in Germany, and he comes from the left. But he has a little son, and he lives in one of the Berlin quarters where young Muslim prevail, and where the schools are dominated by very aggressive Muslim students from the beginning on, already elementary school. And he changed his opinions more and more in the moment he was confronted with the question, how can he protect his son in such a school? And that was interesting for me to see that when it's here with many people the same. You don't hear in Israel anymore the ideas of the left, of the traditional left of the 70s, 80s, 90s about a Palestinian state. The Palestinian state is out of fashion here. So no one really discusses that possibility anymore, because we all know that the Gaza people had 18 years time to build a state or whatever they wanted, and all they did was building tunnels and rocket depots. So we know that the Palestinian state is no real option anymore. And this, when I came to Israel, half of the populace was convinced that the only future is based on a so-called two-state solution. So I'm also share the opinion that is widespread here, that a Palestinian state is out of every possibility at the moment. And I read about it, an article, and sent it to the Neue Zürcher Zeitung. You know, it's one of the most influential papers in Europe, I would say. And they published it. They really published that article where I wrote on one page in all aspects why a Palestinian state is out of possibility at the moment and doesn't make any sense, and the West cannot be interested in such a state. It was just after Ireland, Spain, and Norway had declared publicly they would accept and acknowledge a Palestinian state. So it was interesting for me to see that there were 306 letters in the forum just hours after the article was published online. It was published in the print edition and online. And these 306, the editors had to remove, I think, a dozen of them because they were so anti-Semitic that they didn't want to publish that. But the rest was divided. And it was interesting how many people shared my opinion in German-speaking countries. There were readers from Switzerland, from Germany, Austria. Half of these 300 people shared my opinion. I remember that would have been impossible 10 years ago. So the two-state solution was a doctrine on which the entire future of the region was based. No future in the Middle East without a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. So now half of the readers of the paper agreed with me in this point. So I see that there are things shifting, that people don't, I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic about the capability of people to learn and to adapt to the new situation. I think we should be optimistic about this. Humans are capable to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Humans are capable to learn, but the point is, what's the cost of this learning? I would prefer, honestly, to follow reasonable advice instead of having to pay with war and blood and destruction any crazy hypothesis or any crazy political theory. Like what you're saying, the Palestinian state, has never been an option after 1948. But we kept talking about an impossible solution. Why? The point is that here the question is so intricate. I mean, I half smiled when you mentioned the Norwegians, but it's the Norwegians, it's the Spaniard, and it's who else recognized the
Ireland.
Ireland. Okay. And where is their embassy now? Do they have an embassy in the Palestinian areas? So, I mean, in English, you say, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
You know what happened that the state of Israel correctly told the Norwegians, you cannot have the Palestinian embassy in Israel. You have to go to the West Bank if you don't want to go to Gaza.
Of course, yeah.
Nobody wanted to go.
No. So of course not. Yeah, you are right. That's funny. Yeah, but I think that people see that, and that many people would share, are smiling about this, and that we laugh about it. I'm not that pessimistic that it has to remain like that forever. I think that all the people in Europe are intelligent enough to learn that things have changed. And on October 7th, many people have seen the real face of militant Islam. I mean, there are no misunderstandings anymore about this. Everybody knows what these people want and what they are aiming at. So
I'm sorry, why you're saying everybody know? I mean, if you go in any university, just name one university where people are not completely insane about the topic of Israel. Not everybody knows. People are insane. If you watch the news, even in America, the news is turning into discourses that are borderline anti-Semitic. And universities are I don't know, they are asylums when you go to the topic of Israel.
Maybe they have to go through that to recover afterwards. You know, the people have to go through a fever to get healthy again. So it is in such a way exaggerated and overtaken, overstressed, that I'm quite sure there will be an aversive reaction from a lot of intelligent people who see that here something goes wrong. So I agree with you that things are terrible at the moment, and the situation for Israel is very, very difficult. Israeli people have to face that abroad, but also that's interesting. I have also one grandson who is traveling now, who was in Gaza, and after that, I think it was a good idea to recover from that. He went to Asia, to Thailand, and places like that, and then he went to certain European countries where Jews can feel well. He was in Budapest, but he was also in Portugal, and he's traveling a lot during the last month. I'm really astonished. And he met a lot of people who were anti-Israeli. I mean, there is no doubt about, but he met also a lot of people who gave him to understand that they understood our situation. So that's also my feeling, that it is really dangerous what happens at the American universities. But I cannot imagine that it will be without reaction.
Yeah, but look, do you know the Canary mission? Of course, most likely you do know. It's they collect this data, and if you go on their website, they have a page with professors, assistant professor, all kind of related professions in academia that are giving anti-Semitic statements, and they are saying crazy things. It's thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
The situation,
but it's past already. Believe me, I think it's past already.
Yeah,
it was like that. The last 20 years were really terrible in this regard. I remember very well how often I was cancelled, and what I had to experience. Everyone who was not of the general opinion of that kind, but I feel that it crumbles just these days. So that's maybe the difference between us, that you live in that environment with the people around, but I feel that it crumbles, that it's not too that is not as stable as we thought it would be, that kind of thinking and anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism is a phenomenon anyway that we have to face as long as Jews exist. And it started in ancient times, and we will also have anti-Semitism in the future. That's no question in my eyes. But there are waves. There are times when it goes up and it goes down. And in my eyes, it's at the point it has reached the climax and will go down during the next time. I'm quite sure.
Amen.
But it's very personal impressions. So we have no data and nothing. Many people don't express their opinion openly anymore because it's dangerous. But I get a lot of, I cannot tell you how much letters of solidarity and so on I get from people who read articles of mine where I become more and more radical. I must say this. I become older now, and my time is running out. And I think that I have to say now, outspokenly, but freely and frankly, what I think. I was much more, let's say, in this point, I'm cautious during the last time, but I'm not anymore. I say openly what I think. And I get a lot of course, a lot of opposition is not the right word, a lot of hostility, but more and more also solidarity. So I feel the change. I feel the more you say openly that you do not agree, you find people who tell you that they are in the same situation and that they are happy that you are the one speaking out what they don't dare and what they can't afford. Often people are dependent in situations of dependence of they can't. So when the environment is, for instance, in Germany, when you utter several opinions, you will be isolated and cancelled. So I can afford to say what I think, and that's why it's a kind of experiment to see the reactions, and they are much different from 10 years ago. So something has changed in my eyes.
I hope, I really hope that, because I don't see the foundation at the moment where we can build something when people don't even know basic history. I've been recently
Mm,
to Holland, and the Netherlands is a very cultivated country, very beautiful
mm,
country, great people. I went to a bookstore near the Utrecht University, just basically the university bookstore, and there was a line of propaganda, pro-Palinazi, fake history from the usual culprits, from Finkelstein to the others, even
mm,
translated in Dutch in some cases. And I was
mm,
thinking, if I'm a student and I know nothing about this, and I'm
mm,
in front of this shelf, and I pick any title in here,
mm,
what am I going to learn? It's going to be nonsense from A to B. We don't people, the historians, the people who knows the history, many of them are now retired, are now emerituses, and the new class of history. Do you think you can publish today in any uh, peer reviewed, which is not censorship? It's always sold as a non-censorship
mm,
system. Is a great system, but
mm,
can you publish a paper about I don't know, something simple like saying Israel is not a
mm,
colonizer? Is actually the only example that we know
mm,
of decolonization, as they love
mm.
this terminology. Do you think you can publish such a paper?
Maybe yes. Yeah, I have experienced a lot of different. No, maybe yes. It happens. So I try it sometimes, and as I told you with the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, I had never expected they would publish this article. It was extreme. So I told them that the basics of their European politics of the last 30 years or so were nonsense, and that the Palestinian state is out of any possibility and will not happen, cannot happen. And I was quite sure that I will never hear of them again. But no, they answered the next day already that they find it very interesting. And uh, I mean, it was interesting, of course, because it was a completely opposite of what they teach their children at school. I know that the narrative of the two-state solution is already in the school books in Europe, and
Correct.
all these stories, and people cannot even imagine something different. So, but I think it's a good time for people who dare the experiment, to the risk. I'm trying that. So it's just now. I mean, my grandchildren have to risk their lives in Gaza. I can risk my reputation at least to send articles of that kind. I'm doing that now.
But look at that. You mentioned this point, which it's a very uncomfortable territory. But I want to say something about this.
Hmm.
The anti-Western media is not reporting the real data. They are when I don't know, they even use terms like genocide, etc. On the other hand, you have the Israeli army that during the Gaza operation was advertising their arrival. Now, I tell you something. I was in the army. If my commander would have told me, now you go there, but I tell your enemy before you arrive that you are
Right. Yeah.
going, I would say, you are friggin' crazy. I'm going to report
Right. Yeah.
immediately. So, but Israel, you see, to appease a criminal media system has casualty of good men just for what? You know, I understand all the story of the civilians, the good civilians. But once you say this area should be evacuated, this has never happened in the entire human history. The Allied troop didn't send flyers over Dresden before the bombing. I mean, this is something that at the end, who is paying for this? Again, Israeli soldiers are paying for this.
Yeah, there are, and the opinions about this are divided here in Israel. There are people who say openly and write in the papers that we take at risk the life of our soldiers. It's really like that, that a certain percentage, and not a low one, maybe half of the Israeli soldiers killed were killed because of that, of the cautiousness we use in the confrontation with the enemy. That yeah, the opinions about this are divided. It is a part of the Israeli self esteem of being human, and to try the utmost to protect civilian lives. It doesn't really help, by the way, in the propaganda, because the uninfluenced by that, Hamas numbers were believed. All the European media quoted these wrong and completely absurd numbers of killed children and so on. I wrote about it a lot, but there is a lot of people also who know that in the meantime. So people are not that stupid that they don't see who is the liar here. I mean, the Hamas is so obviously a bunch of scoundrels and killers and liars that everybody sees that. Many people are not interested in it because it opposes their ideological. But nevertheless, I think that it is not as difficult anymore as it has been 10 years ago. So I tried to publish my opinions 10 years ago or 20 years ago with no hope to see it printed. But today it's different. I made the opinion, the experience that even opinions that were considered extreme in this point. I mean, every pro-Israeli opinion is considered extreme at the moment in Europe. So the consensus is still that Israel is the aggressor and so on. But you have to care about that. In my eyes, we can go on and say what we think, and we will see that there will be more and more impressed by that. I'm quite sure.
But you know, because you say it's facts and rationality that are considered extreme right now in Europe, because in front of the amount of facts that we have, or we should have, there is just a narrative. There is just a smoke screen. Think when Netanyahu said at the beginning of this war, he made that reference to was to Amman or to I think it was to Haman, the reference,
Haman, maybe,
the biblical reference. In Europe, the newspapers is calling for genocide because Haman. Really, everything is twisted. You know, if people cannot receive the information. people do not think critically about what happened. Because when I hear, okay, this army is telling the enemy when they are going in there in the aim to save the enemy's civilians, risking their own life. Once again, I do not recall Eisenhower sending a telegram to the people
that's
in
not
San
usually
Lo
in terms
before
of
the. Huh?
that's Israeli style. So we think about that here at the moment, whether it's whether we can keep that upright in times to come, whether we can be all the time that considerate regarding our enemies. So, but it is also part of the Israeli self-understanding. Let us see. I don't know. I'm not the person who can answer this question. So I'm not a military person. It has to be decided from case to case. It's very difficult to decide because many Israeli people stand behind that and say, yes, we have to be human at any cost. That's very difficult. It's very difficult. But things are changing. I must say things are really changing. For, let's say, 10 years ago, when in Israel a terrorist was shot by the police without further ado, so they kill him when he tries to kill other people. It was in Europe still criminalized, so they talked about self-justice and things like that. That it's not legitimate to kill a person without a real trial before the person was had seen a judge. It was decided whether he deserved being killed or not. That's over. The German police is shooting at these people the same way the Israeli police is doing now, 20 years later. So they have silently adopted the Israeli method to kill a terrorist when you see him, when these are doing civil persons here. There was a terrorist here at a petrol station in Beersheba nearby. He shot someone, but passerby, I think a young man who had a gun with him. Many people here have personal guns. I also have to give my grandson the money because I promised him I would do when he gets the permission to have a personal gun. It was his idea. He's 20 years. He said that one of the mistakes on October 7th was that there were two less people without fire, without guns. So we have to be armed, personally armed. And he made such an application. So there is a bureaucratic procedure and a strong criteria, by the way, and examinations of the psychological and body health and whatever. And every year you have to renew that. It's really strong, but hundreds of thousands of people here have personal weapons, and when they see a terrorist, they shoot. There isn't long procedures of asking, are you justified to do that? No, but I remember the discussions in Europe 20 years ago. So this was a sign of Israeli fascism or whatever. So now they do it themselves. They do it in Britain. They do it in Germany. I know in Germany they shot a lot of people during the last year. I read it in the paper and think it's very interesting that you came to the same point. I even remember the time before September 11, when Israel was the only country that made really security checkings at the airport. Israel was the only country in the world. They laughed about us. They told us we were paranoid people who controlled with the scanners and so on. Now they all do. Every airport in the world does that. So I have several times seen the things Israel has done. We were blamed for that and accused of I don't know what when we did it, but 20 years later, it became the general fashion and the general way of doing that. So that's what I have seen. So, and that's why I think the war we have now, there is a lot of outcry, and I don't know what absurd accusations, but in the end, European people will understand that it is the only way to deal with that phenomenon. When you have to deal with Islamic terrorism, you have to do it that way. There is no other.
Every country in the world, when it's attacked, responds. There is no example in history when a country is attacked and should not respond, except for Israel, where this universal criteria suddenly it's not there anymore. Israeli have to wait to be slaughtered. That's
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's nonsense. But again, you see, we are here discussing nonsense because it reminds me an old story about President Johnson. Once Johnson was, he tried to put in the media the idea that his colleague was having sex with the chicken or something like that, and in that direction. And his assistant says, well, are you really expect that the people are going to believe such a nonsense? And Johnson said, I do not expect that. I just want to see him defending himself of the accusation in public. And that's exactly what we are forced to do. We are forced to reiterate the obvious, to talk about what is absolute elementary, because there is an apparatus of disinformation, of lying, of, dark motives that always has to depict Israel in the worst possible way. You recall something. I recall other things. I remember when Israel built the wall to the
for
Palestinian
instance,
territories.
now those walls are usual all over the world. They are built in the United States and Europe, protection fences, all that. I remember, the wall was such.
I also remember the mayor of Jerusalem who showed the statistics saying, look, since we built the wall, we have 99% less terror attacks.
Yeah, of course.
That's a reason. That's absolutely logical reason. Why people don't want to understand the right to self-defense?
No, but they don't. They do. So they do understand. I'm quite sure that also in Europe, no, there will be built walls. They do already. They do it already, and they will do a lot of things their ideology didn't allow them to do until now. But then this ideology will be forgotten. Who talks about what Karl Marx said about this or that? I had to learn all this as a schoolboy. I'm a well-trained Marxist. I learned a lot about Marxism. I forgot it all, and all people I know forgot about it. So maybe there are even some interesting aspects of his criticism of capitalism. I think that it's not wrong, everything he wrote. There are many interesting ideas, but the general approach to the world of Marxism, no one can even remember that anymore. And it was as obliging at certain times also for the Western intellectuals as it is today to accuse Israel of being a apartheid state or whatever. So these things disappear. I have seen entire absurdities coming up, building up to terrible towers of but disappear overnight. Sometimes overnight, sometimes it takes longer. So no, I must tell you, I mean, maybe the closing point that although the situation is difficult, I'm just infected by the general optimism that still rules the place. The atmosphere here in Israel is still positive, and the younger the people, the more. And fortunately, the Israeli populace is very young. We have a democracy where almost 40% of the Israelis are younger than 20. So that's why the general mood is widely dominated by the spirit of the young generation, and it's still positive. I talked to my grandson, who came back from Gaza 3 days ago, and we had a long conversation, and I asked him what about the spirit after so many months. It's almost 1 year. No, he said it's unchanged. He came from a trip abroad where he was with his girlfriend, who is from England, and they traveled in Scotland or somewhere, and he got an SMS or WhatsApp or whatever from some of his friends who told him they had to go back to the army now, 3 of them. They got a call, and he decided, he said, because we have always been as a group of 10, he wants to go back voluntarily also, and he wrote to some others. So in the end, there were 9 of the 10 who went into Gaza. 3 of them were called, and 6 were doing that out of solidarity with their group. I was really astonished about this story. He so much identifies with his friends and what they do and the tasks they have, and they feel the general acknowledgement. I mean, they're highly respected. Every 20-year-old likes to be respected like that the entire society is happy about them and tells them are heroes and so on. But they really mean it, and they still fight, and they don't ask. We had a handful of objectors. A handful of objectors, I think 10 or so, 10 against the 60,000 who went voluntarily without being called up even. So that's the general atmosphere here. And as long as it is like that, I can't be pessimistic. I tell you that. Also not about the situation in Europe and wherever.
Well, let's hope that that you're right. And
I also hope that,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right, Chaim, we talked for a while, and I have to thank you all, as always, for the insights you offer, and I can just wish you now a great rest of the day, and
thank you very much. Yeah, we have Rosh Hashanah, New Year, already in some days, and of course we all hope that we for peace, and that the next New Year, Rosh Hashanah, next year will be in peace already. This one will not be in peace, but thank you very much. Yeah.
Then Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Gam Lecha. Bye.
Bye.